Chapter 276, Between the Strongest. Chen Ping'an had seen many good-looking people the same age as him. His neighbor Song Jishin in Clay Vase Alley, Mr. Chi's students Zhao Yao and Lin Xiaoyi in the private school, the androgynous young man dressed as a female on Osmanthus Island, and Prince Gao Xuan from Great Sui Nation. However, none of them were as good-looking as this young boy in the wine shop. After writing on the tall wall, the young boy carried a jar of wine over and sat down on the neighboring table. He asked for 2 large white bowls, and he invited Su Jia over to drink with him. Su Jia was well aware of how expensive the golden millet wine was, yet he didn't feel like this was inappropriate at all. He cracked open the clay seal and helped pour some wine for both of them. They then touched bowls and drank in a hearty manner. They seemed to be enjoying themselves immensely. At the same time, the old shopkeeper also seemed to be smiling a bit more. However, the pitiful caged oriole stood with its back facing the radiant young boy, appearing feeble and sickly. The handsome young boy raised his wine bowl at Chen Ping'an and said with a smile, "I'm Cao Ci from Middle-earth Divine Continent's Great Duan Empire." Chen Ping'an had no option but to raise his wine bowl and reply, "I'm Chen Ping'an from Eastern Treasured Vile Continent's Great Li Empire." Cao Ci nodded in acknowledgement, and there was clear praise in his eyes as he said, "Your foundation for the 3rd tier of martial arts is quite good." Chen Ping'an didn't know how to respond, so he could only drink a sip of wine in silence. He couldn't help but feel that something was off. After mulling over this for a long time, he finally discovered why their exchange had appeared so strange. As it turned out, neither the attitude nor tone of the handsome young boy from Middle-earth Divine Continent matched with his status as someone of the same age. Instead, his attitude and tone had appeared more similar to the barefoot old man in the bamboo building in Downtrodden Mountain. However, the handsome young boy wasn't as domineering and forceful as Qi Chan's grandfather. Quite the contrary, in fact, Cao Ci had spoken in a calm and amiable manner. Even so, Chen Ping'an had still felt a formless pressure even when they were talking about trivial matters. Ning Yao didn't pay much heed to Cao Ci. However, she was quite unhappy about this eyesore suddenly popping up from out of nowhere. His arrival severely dampened her interest in drinking for much longer. After quickly finishing the half a jar of golden millet wine with Chen Ping'an, she immediately stood up and dragged Chen Ping'an toward the exit. Just as Chen Ping'an was about to leave the wine shop, Cao Ci smiled and shouted, "The girl you like is very good. However, one bad thing about her is that she still can't remember my name after coming across me so many times." Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "I say that's even better." Cao Ci laughed heartily, raising his wine bowl with one hand and waving goodbye to Chen Ping'an with his other. His smile was sincere as he said, "Chen Ping'an will compete to become the strongest 4th-tier martial artist in 3 days' time." This was another remark that seemed a little strange. Chen Ping'an cupped his fists and didn't say anything else. He then turned around and left the small golden millet-blessed land with Ning Yao. Inside the wine shop, Su Jia asked in bewilderment, "You like Ning Yao?" Cao Ci shook his hand with a smile and replied, "I like my master, who's invincible in my mind. I like the Empress, who has small dimples on her cheeks when she smiles. I like Ning Yao, who doesn't care at all about me. However, unlike what you're thinking, I don't like them in a romantic sense. Romantic relationships severely inhibit cultivation." He took a swig of wine and sighed. "I genuinely can't imagine myself falling for a girl in the future." "Oh, okay," Su Jia replied with a nod. He believed whatever Cao Ci said. However, excitement quickly spread across the young shop attendant's face, and he changed the topic and asked, "Judging from what you said just then, you're about to advance to the 5th tier." Cao Ci nodded and replied, "I've stayed at the Sword Qi Great Wall for so long already, so it's about time for me to advance." Su Jia grinned and remarked, "If you were still in your hometown, I suppose you would have advanced to the 7th tier already." Before Cao Ci could say anything, Su Jia immediately added, "And before reaching the 7th tier, you would have become the strongest 4th tier, 5th tier, and 6th tier martial artist." When it came to discussing this, Su Jia was even more elated than Cao Ci himself. The old shopkeeper told me that your current fourth-tier cultivation base is the strongest fourth tier in the history of the world, not just the strongest among the current fourth-tier martial artists. It can be said that your fourth-tier cultivation base is without precedent and without rival in the future. Is that true? Cao Ci was slightly exasperated as he replied, I can probably confirm that it's without precedent. However, to say that it's without rival in the future. I'm just a pure martial artist, so I naturally can't divine the martial fortune of the world for the next several hundred to 1,000 years. Su Jie laughed loudly and exclaimed, Cao Ci, if I can't help myself and venture out to look for young mistress in the future, I'll definitely travel to the great Duan Empire to visit you as well. Cao Ci nodded and replied, then I'll prepare some fine wine for you. Su Jie suddenly lowered his voice and begged, Cao Ci, how about we have a fight where you lose to me on purpose? That way, I can tell others that I defeated Cao Ci when I leave Stalactite Mountain in the future. Just think about it. You'll be invincible in 10 years or 100, and you might even beat up True Invincible, the Taoist's second disciple in the heavenly world, and turn him into fake invincible. At that time, I would be the only person who ever defeated you, Cao Ci. Thanks to this, the entire world will definitely ask about who I am. Perhaps young mistress will also be impressed and look at me with new eyes. Cao Ci smiled with squinted eyes, raising his wine bowl with one hand and lightly patting his head with the other. All right, you've defeated me now, Su Jie. When you leave Stalactite Mountain, feel free to tell others that you've defeated me. Su Jie felt a little guilty, and he asked, You might be fine with this now, but will you go back on your word in the future? Cao Ci drank the wine in his bowl before turning around and waving a hand at the old shopkeeper. Old Lu, are you willing to give me a jar of wine for free? I feel a sense of regret now, and without some wine in my stomach, I can't suppress that feeling of regret no matter what. If I drink another jar of forgetting sorrow wine, I can be free of regret for at least 100 years. Su Jie looked at the old shopkeeper with a pitiful expression. The old shopkeeper smiled and replied, Su Jie, bring a jar of wine over for Cao Ci. Also, remember to keep in mind the shopkeeper's kindness in the future. Don't secretly grumble about me being miserly all the time, and don't blame me for not allowing you to travel around the cultivation world. Su Jie giddily ran away to grab a jar of wine. Cao Ci only had a single bowl of wine remaining. While waiting for the new jar of wine to arrive, he took his bowl of wine and walked over to the tall wall. His eyes swam over the wall. 3 years had already passed since his first taste of wine, and many new lines had already appeared on the wall. In the end, Cao Ci's gaze settled on 3 characters in the bottom corner of the wall. The characters were proper yet rigid, and Cao Ci asked in curiosity, Old Lu, are these the characters that Chen Ping'an wrote on the wall? Lasting Sword Qi. What's wrong? You think that boy is truly exceptional? The old shopkeeper asked. Cao Ci squatted down and drank a small sip of wine. There was indifference in his eyes as he replied. He might be the strongest third-tier martial artist, the one who inherited the position I vacated when I broke through. Hearing this, the old shopkeeper thought it was a shame. The caged oriole could only determine a pure martial artist's martial fortune during a limited period of time. Indeed, after a person wrote on the wall, it wasn't like the oriole could fly out of its cage whenever it wanted to grab their martial fortune with its beak. Meanwhile, Chen Ping'an had coincidentally visited and written on the wall after the female imperial preceptor and before the handsome young boy. Sandwiched between the two of them, the old shopkeeper didn't need to dream about the oriole leaving its cage to do anything for him. He didn't have the courage. Cao Ci and Su Jie finished another jar of forgetting sorrow wine, drinking half a jar each. However, Su Jie couldn't hold his alcohol, so he got drunker and drunker. In the end, he passed out drunk on the table. Meanwhile, Cao Ci was the type of person who would become increasingly awake and aware as they drank. His eyes were bright and piercing. If it weren't for Master coming here to pick me up, I genuinely wanted to venture to the world to the south of the Sword Qi Great Wall. In 40 or 50 years at most, I would dare to battle against those dozen or so great demons. Before that, though, there will definitely be many hardy and satisfying life-and-death challenges, Cao Ci suddenly remarked. The old shopkeeper smiled and said, Do you believe me when I say that you'll immediately die after leaving the city wall? Cao Ci sighed in response. The reason for this was very simple, and the old shopkeeper had precisely gotten through to him. It was very likely that Cao Ci had already attracted the attention of those top-notch great demons. In other words, he belonged to the list of people they would definitely kill on sight. Forget about giving him 40 or 50 years to develop, he'd be lucky if they gave him 40 or 50 seconds. Then I'll just return to Middle-earth Divine Continent, Cao Ci said in resignation. Whether purposely or not, the old shopkeeper mused. The old ancestor of the Dong clan left a path of destruction in his wake in the savage world, and he eventually shot to fame at the Sword Chi Great Wall. However, one such person is enough. Moreover, only one such person can exist. If the demon tribe allows the rise of another deadly opponent like him, say, a Cao Ci who has the potential to reach the 11th tier of martial arts, then they might as well kill themselves out of shame. I need to ask Master if she's advanced to the 11th tier yet. I hope she hasn't, Cao Ci said. The old shopkeeper smiled and teased, as her disciple, aren't you being a little too unconscionable? Why aren't you hoping for your master to achieve the best? As it turns out, you are much like Su Jia. This isn't good. You're Cao Ci, so how can you be so mediocre? Cao Ci shook his head and raised an arm. He then extended his hand and held it above his head, waving it back and forth above the table. His voice was smooth and his expression was certain as he said, Master's martial Dao has already reached this height, and she's almost powerful enough to rival those standing on the pinnacle of the pinnacle already. If she hasn't advanced to the 11th tier yet, then my master, or the future me, can maybe. The old shopkeeper smiled faintly and said, we can wait and see. Cao Ci looked at the old shopkeeper and commented, there are far too few old seniors who are as easygoing and amiable as you. That's because I'm a poor old geezer who's already accepted my fate, the old shopkeeper replied in a self-ridiculing voice. Cao Ci quietly sat at the table. Su Jia was snoring in a thunderous manner, while the old shopkeeper had vanished to some unknown place. The Golden Millet Blessed Land was naturally a bit bigger than what people imagined. It didn't contain just the wine shop and nothing else. However, it was indeed damaged and incomplete. If it weren't for the old shopkeeper, one of the founders of the 100 schools of thought, maintaining the blessed land with all his strength, it would have already suffered a fate not too dissimilar to Jewel's small world. It would have altogether lost its right to be called a blessed land. What were the sages of the 3 teachings and 100 schools of thought busy with every day? Where did the 10 large worlds, 36 small worlds, and 72 blessed lands come from? After Eastern treasured vile continents, Jewel's small world shattered and fell, were there truly only 35 small worlds remaining. In reality, many sages from Majestic World needed to develop new territories and expand the map of Majestic World. Regarding this point, the Taoist sages in Heavenly World were slightly different. Rather than expanding and developing new territories, they sought to increase the height of White Jade Capital, adding layer upon layer above its peak. They continued to build higher and higher. Meanwhile, the world controlled by the Buddhists sought to extend the reach and understanding of Buddhism. They wanted people to live without doubts and attachments, whether that be in their past life, present life, or future life. Of course, in addition to creating new worlds and blessed lands and educating the masses, the Confucian sect in Majestic World also needed to keep an eye on the demon tribe in Savage World. The 2 other worlds weren't whiling away their time doing nothing either. Taoist branch master Lu Chen was stirring up trouble in Majestic World, setting up a grand game of Go. However, was the Confucian's second sage, not taking disciples, and spreading his teachings in Heavenly World. Inside the wine shop, Cao Ci remained calm and at ease even though there was no one to talk to and no wine to drink. He sat there just like that. It was difficult to imagine that there existed martial artists who were uninterested in advancing their cultivation base and were instead amused by suppressing their cultivation. When the old shopkeeper returned, he smiled and asked, Cao Ci, apart from reaching the pinnacle of the martial Dao, is there nothing else you want to achieve in your life? I'm thinking about what I would want to achieve, Cao Ci replied with a smile. Then you're inferior to Su Jia and that young boy from the Great Li Empire. the old shopkeeper teased. Cao Ci nodded in agreement. In the end, the handsome young boy in white walked out of the wine shop. He didn't look for his master staying in the private estate of some large clan in Stalactite Mountain, and he instead went straight to the foot of Lone Peak. When he arrived near the plaza, both the young Taoist priest and the sword-hugging middle-aged man looked over and greeted him. Cao Ci stopped and chatted with them for a long time, and only then did he walk forward and disappear into the mirror-like gate. When he arrived on the other side, the old sword cultivator engrossed in refining his bonded sword and the Taoist saber nun who had a Tao saber by her waist also smiled and greeted him. Cao Ci stopped again and chatted with them for a long time. They chatted about Tao power, about sword techniques, and about the world. Cao Ci could chat with anyone. This had always been the case for the past few years. As for those senior immortals who had achieved success long ago, regardless of whether they were reclusive elites or famous sword immortals, some of them would reap great benefits from their conversations with Cao Ci. In fact, some of them would even feel ashamed of themselves because of this young boy at the fourth tier of martial arts. Cao Ci. Cao Ci from Middle-earth Divine Continent. His background was unremarkable, and his ancestors had been farmers for generations upon generations. In fact, his clan couldn't even be considered moderately wealthy. After a period of war, their peaceful home had been razed to the ground, forcing everyone to flee with the other refugees. Displaced and drifting from place to place, there had been hardships and eternal farewells every day. Afterward, a tall woman riding a horse and traveling through the cultivation world by herself had come across him and taken him in as a disciple. At the time, the tall woman had held him in her arms while riding her handsome horse through windy and snowy nights. She had smiled at the child who was only 7 or 8 years old and said, "Cao Ci, from today onward, you're the only disciple of me, Pei Bei." Cao Ci slowly made his way through the city that lay to the north of the Sword Qi Great Wall. If familiar faces greeted him, he would stop and chat with them for a while. If no one greeted him, then he would occasionally stop and look up at the drifting kites, the curved eaves, or the lusterless door gods on the courtyard doors. In the end, he slowly climbed up the city wall and returned to the small thatched cottage behind the older and larger thatched cottage. He had nothing better to do, so he casually flicked through a few books before putting them all aside after reading a few pages. He stepped out of his thatched cottage and walked for 3 to 4 kilometers along the path on top of the city wall. Only then did he find Grandpa Chen standing there and gazing south of the city wall. The young boy in white nimbly leaped onto the perimeter of the wall. They both stood there without saying anything. After leaving the wine shop, Ning Yao asked for the location of Stork Inn before taking Chen Ping'an in the direction of the catch and release dock. Chen Ping'an saw the extremely worried Lady Gui, as well as the very gloomy Jin Su, after arriving in the small alley where the inn was located. After seeing Chen Ping'an safe and sound, Lady Gui felt as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She didn't scold him, and she didn't even ask him why he had returned so late. She simply greeted the young girl whom Chen Ping'an had introduced as Ning Yao. Afterward, she immediately left and returned to Osmanthus Island, which was still docked at the catch and release dock. There were many business transactions to make, and she was far too busy to worry about anything else. Moreover, there was also the matter pertaining to the Jiang clan's young master from Jade Tablet sect. These were all troublesome matters. Jin Su had initially wanted to grumble about how she had been given a severe dressing down by her master because of his sudden disappearance. However, upon seeing the calm yet intense demeanor of the young girl, dressed in a long green robe and wearing a sword by her waist, Jin Su didn't really dare to complain anymore. The 3 of them didn't go to the inn in the small alley. Upon hearing that Jin Su and Chen Ping'an were going to visit Stalactite Mountain's Milu Cliff and other scenic spots today, Ning Yao expressed that she would also tag along because she hadn't been to these places before. Even though Jin Su felt slightly uneasy on the inside, she was unwilling to appear too timid on the outside. Thus, she took the initiative and started to chat with Ning Yao, the young girl who didn't look very approachable. In reality, Ning Yao wasn't a very haughty person. She was simply very lazy. When unfamiliar people like Jinsu talked to her and asked her questions, Ning Yao would still listen to them and offer them responses. However, her responses would all be extremely short and simple. In the end, Jinsu was at a complete loss regarding how to communicate with Ning Yao. She fell silent, and the atmosphere became a little awkward. However, there were large and tumultuous waves surging through Jinsu's mind. Ning Yao claimed that she was from the Sword Chi Great Wall. If outsiders wanted to travel from Stalactite Mountain to the Sword Chi Great Wall, all they needed to do was pay money. However, if sword cultivators from the Sword Chi Great Wall wanted to enter Stalactite Mountain, it was said that this would be difficult even for sword immortals with exceptional contributions. It was no wonder that Jinsu's mind was wandering. In reality, her train of thought wasn't exactly wrong. Ning Yao's surname played a huge part in this. However, Jinsu's guess was only half correct. Lady Gui wasn't willing to delve deep into the many secrets of the Sword Chi Great Wall with her prized disciple, so Jinsu was only roughly aware of the 13 soul-stirring battles that had taken place back then. Even though the young girl beside her had the surname Ning, Jinsu only dared to regard her as a direct descendant of the Sword Chi Great Wall's Ning clan. She had most likely traveled here to complete an important mission for her clan. Jinsu didn't dare to consider the most outrageous reality, and the reason for this was very simple. This was because Chen Ping'an was with her. Due to Ning Yao's presence, Jinsu felt extremely restricted and hesitant as she walked around Milu Cliff, the incense offering tower, and the Lightning Lake platform. She felt very uncomfortable, and this made her entire experience in the 3 famous scenic spots dull and uninspiring. However, Jinsu was an osmanthus girl, after all, so not only was her cultivation aptitude very good, but her emotional intelligence was very high as well. Thus, there were many times when she would purposely wander away from Chen Ping'an and the untalkative young girl, allowing them to enjoy each other's company and chat about whatever they wanted. Chen Ping'an wasn't too interested in those epic stories about changing empires, shifting worldly momentum, and the rise and fall of humanity. In fact, he didn't understand these things, and he didn't want to understand them either. However, since Ning Yao was telling him about these matters, he was willing to remember them and commit everything to memory. Jinsu found it slightly strange why such a cold and aloof girl was willing to open up and talk so much with a taciturn person like Chen Ping'an. During their visits to the scenic spots, the 3 of them walked with other visitors and climbed the Lightning Lake platform together. While standing there, an old Taoist priest with a golden fly whisk and a silver fly whisk suddenly appeared on a step and smiled at Ning Yao, saying, "My teacher has issued an order. If Miss Ning needs anything while staying in Stalactite Mountain, then you're free to raise a request. Even if you ask to visit the bells of the 3 pure ones on top of Lone Peak, that will still be allowed." Ning Yao naturally looked over to Chen Ping'an. Chen Ping'an shook his head slightly, so Ning Yao shook her head as well and said, "We won't go to Lone Peak." The old Taoist priest smiled and said, "Then I won't bother you any longer. If Miss Ning needs anything, then just get a Taoist priest to inform Stalactite Mountain." Ning Yao initially didn't want to respond. However, when she saw Chen Ping'an cupping his fists to thank the old Taoist priest, she also nodded and replied, "Okay." "The Flood Dragon True Lord," Jinsu murmured. The old Taoist priest was about to leave the Lightning Lake platform. As the 3rd in command in Stalactite Mountain, his profound Tao power was incredibly well known even in southern Whirl Continent. Thus, he could clearly hear the thoughts in people's minds, to say nothing of their murmuring. He smiled and asked, "Is anything the matter, young miss?" Jinsu instantly became pale with fright. She hurriedly shook her head and replied, "No, there's nothing wrong at all. I simply admire you too much, so I couldn't help but murmur your title. Please forgive me, true lord." The old Taoist priest laughed heartily and said, "I'm nowhere near that domineering. Moreover, there isn't any rule in Stalactite Mountain that prohibits others from calling my title, much less punishment for them." The old Taoist priest vanished in a flash. Jinsu gulped with lingering fear. This upper 5-tier immortal in Stalactite Mountain was a Taoist true lord who had gained renown through slaying flood dragons in the South Sea. Yet, he had stood in front of her just like that and even conversed with her. The Flood Dragon True Lord's 11th tier cultivation base could definitely crush the large majority of unpolished Jade Tier 1 Chi refiners in the world. No one doubted that the title of Heavenly Lord was already within the old Taoist priest's grasp. When the three of them walked back to Stork Inn, it was surprisingly Ning Yao who started to talk with Jin Su. She asked questions while Jin Su answered, and it was actually the latter who spoke less this time. Ning Yao was in a fairly good mood. Just then, she and Chen Ping'an had bought a pair of exquisite spirit tools from a stall at the foot of Milu Cliff. The spirit tools were shaped like the two halves of a yin-yang diagram. When they arrived at Stork Inn, the poker-faced young innkeeper informed them that the inn was already full. Without a second word, Ning Yao directly took out a grain rain coin and placed it on the front desk, asking if this was enough. The eyelids of the young inn manager quivered, and he was just about to say something in response. However, Chen Ping'an had already snatched the grain rain coin away and said with a smile, "Ning Yao is our friend, so can you work something out for us, Mr. Innkeeper?" The innkeeper smiled and replied, "I wish I could work something out for you. However, it's not like I can kick other guests out, can I? Stork Inn has a reputation to maintain, after all, and we still need to do business in the future." "Then I'll stay in another inn," Ning Yao said bluntly. Chen Ping'an took a deep breath and took out another grain rain coin from his own pockets. He gently placed it on the table and said, "Inn manager, can we please discuss this a bit more?" The young inn manager smiled faintly and accepted the grain rain coin. "No worries, please give me a moment." Chen Ping'an returned the other grain rain coin to Ning Yao. However, she looked at him and asked, "What are you doing?" Chen Ping'an smiled and replied, "I'm inviting you to stay at the inn." Ning Yao moved her hand up and down and weighed the grain rain coin in her palm. There was a hint of exasperation in her voice as she said, "It's so difficult for you to earn a grain rain coin, yet these things aren't worth very much over at the Sword Chi Great Wall. This is called trying to act generously at your own cost. This is very boring. What's wrong with staying at a different inn? Staying anywhere is the same. I'm not as fussy as you think." Chen Ping'an extended a hand and chuckled, then returned the grain rain coin to me. Ning Yao rolled her eyes and resolutely put the grain rain coin away. "Just wait to feel anguish," she gloated. In the end, Stork Inn managed to clear out the largest room for them. It was a private courtyard located outside the side door of some study. Chen Ping'an was very satisfied with this. Ning Yao didn't think anything about it. Before leaving them, the young inn manager smiled at the three of them and placed the grain rain coin on the table, saying, "I mulled over things for a bit, and I feel like this coin might be too hot for my hands. I don't dare to accept it. This young miss can stay here in the same way as young Master Chen. I'll record the cost on the tab and ask Osmanthus Island for payment later." Chen Ping'an had no idea what was going on. Jin Su looked at the inn manager with gratitude in her eyes. Chen Ping'an sat down beside the table and was just about to grab the grain rain coin. However, Ning Yao immediately placed her hand over it and took it away. She glanced at the confused Chen Ping'an and raised her eyebrows as if challenging him. Chen Ping'an smiled and pretended that nothing had happened. Jin Su perceptively bade farewell and took her leave. After closing the door, Chen Ping'an immediately took out all of his treasures and belongings and placed them on the table. Ning Yao was slightly astonished, and she sighed with emotion. "Chen Ping'an, how impressive of you. You're quite good at making money now, and you've gone from a charity to a money maker? You're the fake one, right?" Chen Ping'an copied Ning Yao, leaning back slightly and crossing his arms. There was a smug expression on his face. Today on Stalactite Mountain. There was a side of Ning Yao never seen before, and there was a side of Chen Ping'an never seen before. It was truly a beautiful reunion between the two of them. 1. 11th tier.